So I'm just going to speak in French, but perhaps I'll say something in English as well so that everyone understands. So this is the end of this first part of our day. So we're now going to start the final panel session. And we're right on time, and it will go on until 5:30 here in Abu Dhabi, at which point there'll be a cocktail, which is offered by ICOM France in front of the setting sun. And so Marion, and over to you, and thank you to Klaus and Elke for the beginning this afternoon.
In English, for those who don't understand, it's now the second part of our program, the round table, which will finish at 5:30 with a cocktail offered by ICOM France in front of the sunset.
Thank you, Juliette, for leaving me the floor. So I will right now invite all the speakers for the roundtable entitled Museology in 2025 that I will moderate as the co-vice chair of ICOFOM. Please, Karen Brown, Hervé Barbaret, Guilhem André, Bruno Soares, Darko Babic, and Carly Degbelo. Take a seat and this roundtable will be in English only with a translation, and we will discuss in English. Perfect. Good afternoon again, everyone. So it is the last part of our day, our long day with fascinating presentations since this morning. I would like to start this time with thanking again all the contributors of this day, to thank, of course, the Louvre Abu Dhabi to hosting us today and to give us the opportunity to have these discussions in this beautiful room, in this beautiful building. And of course, I would like to thank all the speakers who agreed to be part of this roundtable. So, what does museology look like in 2025? We discussed a lot since this morning about the evolution of museums themselves, but now we'll go deeper in this topic with museology and how it also moves and what are the innovative things, the things that are transforming, and some of the core of museology that remain the same within this time. To discuss about that, we have today 6 speakers coming from different backgrounds, different countries, different continents, both between academia, museum professionals, politics at some point, and scholars and teachers who will share their own experiences in these fields, who will be able to present also the different museologies in 2025 from different contexts, from their own backgrounds. Of course, we will not do a complete synthesis of museologists today, but just to open the scope of a few topics. Feel free to, at the end, we will keep some time to give you also the opportunity to share from your own perspectives and challenges and issues that you face in museology in your own countries and backgrounds and museums. So feel free to also add some comments at the end of this roundtable. I will start with presenting our speakers today, and then I will open the questions and discussions. So I will go from my left to to the end of the stage. To start with Carly Degbelo, who comes from Benin. He's a museum professional and a PhD student in France and Benin. He will represent the École du Patrimoine Africain, who is a former student, but he will also be able to talk about his own work as a Catholic priest in charge of the Apostolic Museum in Porto Novo, and a museum project that he deals with. He is also part of the ICOM working group on decolonization, which is another part of his involvement in museum and ICOM. Professor Karen Brown talked a bit earlier today. Is professor in art history at the University of St. Andrews with a focus on museology. She is the chair of ICOFOM, also part of ICOM Ireland, and she worked a lot on projects, books, and special issues on community museums, especially with a focus on museum and heritage in island contexts. Hervé Barbaret is a French administrator who is currently the CEO of the Agence France Museum since 2019. He also has experiences in similar positions in different institutions in France, in the Cité de l'Architecture, for instance, in the French Ministry of Culture, and in national manufacturers. Then Dr. Bruno Soares is a reader in museum and heritage studies at the University of St. Andrews, after having similar position in Brazil at the INE Rio. Over the past few years, he has a big role in ICOM and in ICOFOM, with the new definition, acting as the ICOFOM chair, and working now with the new Code of Ethics and SOMUS. His works are based on community museums and anti-colonial and social movements linked to museology. Darko Babic is from Croatia. He is associate professor and chair of museology at the University of Zagreb. He has been for a long time involved as a board member in ICTOP, the ICOM committee for training of professional for museums. He has also a long experience in planning and implementing projects for museums and heritage sites. And last but not least, Dr. Guilhem André is director of the scientific curatorial and collection management in the Louvre Abu Dhabi since 2023, after being chief curator in the Louvre Abu Dhabi. He worked on the program for the Asian arts and Asian collections, and he holds a PhD in archaeology and art history, who made him worked with many different Asian countries and with archaeological projects. To start with, I would like to invite you all to introduce yourself a bit more, and with a focus on your institution and especially your role, plural or singular, that you play in the different institutions you're involved in, just so we know more about your own works. Who wants to start?
Thank you. I remark that translate is not okay, so I would like speak French, si it is possible. Ah, il n'y a pas de traduction. Ah, d'accord. Ok, d'accord. Thank you, everybody. I am Carly, so I teach in École du patrimoine africain, school to Benin, who give a formation for curator. So now I represent my school, who is in Porto. Oui. Ok, d'accord. Thank you. Merci pour Marion. Alors je disais tantôt que je représente ici l'école du patrimoine africain, qui est une école située à Porto Novo, qui forme les conservateurs du patrimoine africain. Une école qui a été créée depuis 1996 et qui a commencé à former donc les étudiants d'abord en Italie à l'ICOM et puis après délocalisés principalement au Bénin pour former les conservateurs de l'Afrique pour les musées africains. Donc en résumé, je peux résumer ainsi le contenu de l'école dans laquelle je travaille, si je réponds à ta question.
Carly represents today the École du patrimoine africain, which I can translate as the School for African Heritage, which is based in Porto Novo in the Republic of Benin. The school was created in 1996. In the beginning, focused with a link with ICOM, and now working to train all the different museum professionals for the African continent.
Hi, again. Thank you for the introduction, Marion. Thank you for bringing us together today to have what will hopefully be a reasonably profound conversation about museology in 2025, or maybe it should be museology in 2026, for those of us looking forward to Christmas. So, as Marion said, I work in the University of St Andrews, which is in Scotland. Most of you have probably heard of Edinburgh. It's about an hour and a half from Edinburgh up the northeast coast. So it's cold, but it's a microclimate, and we actually have quite a lot of sun and a couple of very nice beaches as well. St Andrews is over 600 years old. It was founded in 1413, and it was the first university in Scotland. It's very beautiful. We have a strong medieval heritage in a castle, a cathedral, and other people know the town for other reasons. So, for example, Chariots of Fire, the famous movie, was filmed on the beach, and it's known as the home of golf because of the invention of golf there. Our School of Art History is where Museum and Heritage Studies is located, and I'm sure Bruno will be saying a few words about that as well. That brings a different dynamic. If any of you are a minority in a majority school, you will know that it brings a different dynamic if you are within a bigger discourse. And this is quite often the case for museum studies or museology, whether it be located in an anthropology department or a history department, or in our case, art history. It comes with a certain amount of weight. At the moment, talking about institutions, St Andrews is ranked second in the UK, second to the School of Economics in London, and the Art History School is first in the UK. For the part of Museum and Heritage Studies, we have been in existence for about 35 years. It began life as Museum and Gallery Studies as a part-time course mainly aimed at upskilling already working professionals, but it changed to a full-time course of Museum and Gallery Studies. And for the first 30 years, the focus was very much on training curators. So training and curatorship has been the focus. And there was a group exhibition, putting on exhibitions, designing an education programme, and so on. And so the course has fed much of the museum sector in Scotland over those decades, and many of the staff work in the country. But it's not limited to that. In fact, we had a collaboration with the Zayed University for 5 years, teaching a Master's in Museum Studies there at distance as well. But in 2025, the programme has changed inexorably more towards, I would say, a critical museology focus in a reshaping of the course. And of course, there is a new focus on distance and online learning. In my own current role at St Andrews, I'm coordinating a large research project called Shared Island Stories, which I hope I'll have a little bit more time to talk about in the future. But I think I've said enough for now.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm Hervé Barbaret, so I'm the CEO of France Museum, as Marion just said before. Before that, I was in the Louvre Paris as well. I entered the Louvre Paris in 2007, and it's an important date because it's a date when the intergovernmental agreement designing the project of Louvre Abu Dhabi was signed. So I was really in Louvre Paris at the inception of this project. And today I'm in France Museum. So France Museum is actually a kind of club of the main French museums who are part of the Louvre Abu Dhabi project, sharing expertise, as I mentioned this morning. And what is very important is that France Museum, being a kind of, let's say, avatar of the French museums, but not being a museum per se, it means that actually, from a conceptual point of view, we are inside and outside, and actually new ideas are much better thought about from this viewpoint. So France Museum is basically an agency deriving from the French museums, but autonomous, and it is a consultancy that proposes expertise, which are, I think, much more independent from some kind of doxa, main ideas, and able to change really what could be considered as the museology. So it's why I'm, of course, very happy to be here today to discuss this very important question about museology in 2025. Thank you.
It is. Thank you, Marion, for this introduction. I'm Bruno Brulon Soares, as already said, and I'm currently a lecturer in the University of St Andrews, teaching museology, museum studies, and heritage studies. Thank you, Karen, for introducing our institution in such a nice way, so that I don't need to do that. Maybe I can talk a little bit more about what we're doing now with our program and my background and how I'm helping shape this program for the future generation of professionals, as you called. I liked how many times we refer to the future professionals of museums in this session. And for some people, this might be an abstraction, but for us, teaching museology, this is very concrete. And I privilege very much this position of being constantly teaching, but also learning from the new generations, learning from what they bring to the table in terms of how they see museums developing into the future. And most importantly, I think one of the things I could say is how much they are eager to change the sector, which for me gives me a lot of hope in terms of trying to solve some of the problems that were raised here today, such as the climate crisis, but also the vast inclusion of people who have been historically excluded from museums. And this is something that doesn't really just appear in our lectures. This is actually something that is brought to the university by the students themselves who seek to be future professionals in the sector. Maybe to give a little bit of context, I should say that before being a lecturer at the University of St. Andrews, I worked in different positions in Brazil for at least 15 years, also teaching museum professionals and young generations. As you might know, Latin America and particularly Brazil has a long tradition with museology and particularly with museology training. And I have been also privileged to be able to work with new generations in Latin America. During that time, I also worked with several community-based museums. I helped establish a few of them, and that was also part of my laboratory and school as a museologist and a museum professional, learning from communities and learning from their own creativity and how they approach the issues that we're facing today. But I think most importantly, the reason I'm in this panel is because I'm currently representing as the chair of the new established committee of social museology of ICOM. This is our first participation in a general conference of ICOM. We were established in March 2024. So there are a lot of challenges on the way, but I think it's very important that we do have now a committee to discuss social museology or museology from the perspective of societies and the different social groups that belong to the museums or that have been excluded by museums and are now pledging for their role in museum making more than just being represented in the museums. So I think that's a bit of what I'm going to say in the next few questions that are going to be asked, and I hope to be able to contribute to the debate. Thank you.
So it's on, okay. So good afternoon to all. Thank you, Marion, for the introduction. So my name is Darko, and as Marion said, I'm coming from Croatia, and I'm working as associate professor at the University of Zagreb. Zagreb is the capital of Croatia, and University of Zagreb is the biggest and the oldest university in Southeast Europe, established in 1669. And in case of University of Zagreb, in 1984, now late Professor Ivo Morojević established the sub-department of museology. And as Karen said, museology could be connected with different scientific disciplines. In our case, in 1984, and we still have that kind of tradition, although it changed a little bit in the meantime, it was connected foremost with information and communication sciences. So it's slightly different maybe compared to the majority of other museology study programs, but it's not unique because at that time, I will not go into details, but at that time, you know, Eastern Europe was quite close to that tradition, which was the same which we applied in ex-Yugoslavia at that time, now Croatia. Later on, so we started in 1986, we started with a study program. Again, if you look at European or especially world scale, 1986 was 39 years ago now. And it does not sound like a long history, but compared to many other museology study programs, which were established after that, we have quite a long tradition within Europe and, as I said, within the entire world. In 2008, we changed a little bit of our program. It's a Bologna reform, again, not European thing, I will not go into details about that. And we established the Master in Museology and Heritage Management. And again, I will not go into detail now why we done that, because some other questions I think will cover that part. So from 2006 all the way till today, we have the Master in Museology and Heritage Management, and around 20 to 25 students every year, which for size of Croatia is quite a nice number. Out of my other experience, I was, as Marion explained, I am quite active in ICOM, including in national one and the training committee. I have some connection with ICOMOS 2, Foremost Interpretation and Presentation Committee there, so I find quite good opportunity to make, if possible, connection in between those two organizations. And out of my personal experience, beside working at public sector at university, Zagreb University is a public university, I had experience working in non-governmental sector, so not only concerning ICOM, but having full-time job in non-governmental sector before my career at university, and in one period I have my own company, which was more or less doing the tasks within the museum and the heritage kind of the jobs, foremost planning and so on. But it was interesting part of my life because I was in situation that I have actually at one point my students, which when they graduate become my, not full-time, but my employees. So kind of, strange experience, well, not strange, but I had that kind of the feeling what is going on, not exactly in museum, but what is going on with the students when they actually graduate in at least in our program and supposed to be must go on the market and find a job. And I think for the rest, there will be enough time later on in this discussion.
Good afternoon. My name is Guilhem André. I am the Director for Scientific, Curatorial and Collection Management at the Louvre Abu Dhabi. I'm sure everyone knows a lot now on the museum since there was a bit of time for the visit after the first sessions. But I want to say my activity now at the museum is really to bring to life the original concept of the museum, which is being a museum with a universal vocation, a universal museum, as Manuel reminded us this morning, a museum which is only 8 years old, but covers many different fields, actually all the fields that a museum can cover, most probably, and this is going from the temporary exhibitions that receive the support of France Museum, as Hervé just said, but also, of course, the building of our own collections that is ongoing since 2009, and that allowed us to assemble almost 7,000 numbers since the origin. We also organize all our narrative and displays in the galleries, in the permanent galleries. We have also an activity in terms of research, and I'm sure we'll have plenty of time to discuss about that. So this is in a nutshell what we do in my department, and I want to thank all the teams. Some are here today. It's around 50 persons, and they are spread across 8 different teams. And this is an incredible task that we are accomplishing on an everyday basis. And I'm very glad of these results that we have, and that allowed us to bring more than 1,400,000 visitors last year to the museum.
Thank you for your answers. Based on all your different experiences, how would you describe and define in a few words museology in 2025 in terms of theories and practices, and how you deal with these to different things in your own works?
Merci. Alors, comme je le disais tantôt dans ma première intervention, l'École du patrimoine africain a donc pour socle l'Afrique, former des professionnels africains pour l'Afrique d'abord et pour le monde. Donc, ma définition donc, de la muséologie part donc de ce soubassement qui est nécessaire et qui va donc de l'ensemble des études liées donc aux connaissances acquises pour conserver et diffuser le patrimoine culturel, mais également tout ce qui a comme institution culturelle, se basant également sur les pratiques muséales endogènes. Donc, l'école du patrimoine africain va au-delà des connaissances acquises dans les livres et de l'Occident, mais questionne également la culture à travers ce que je peux appeler les gardiens du temple, donc les sachants qui n'ont pas été donc à l'école, mais qui connaissent des techniques de conservation.
The École du patrimoine africain is really is really based on African continent, of course. So even all the different aspects of museology is based on this. Museology is not only what we learn from books, what we learn from theories, etc., but also from the grassroots conservative practices, people that were not trained in different schools in museology, but who owns and inherits some kind of knowledge that Kali called the keepers of the temples.
Hello again, thank you. So museology in 2025, I would speak to with two hats on, one from the University of St Andrews as a researcher and then the other one from the perspective of ICOFOM perhaps. But to answer the question to begin with, we need to sort of understand what we mean by museology. When I first spoke to François Mérès, he said, oh, you work in Scotland, so you're from an Anglo-Saxon museum studies background. So that sort of woke me up to think about what he was trying to say, because I'd never thought of myself as an Anglo-Saxon before. And, there's quite a lot to reflect on there. There is a predominance of museum studies practical courses in the UK in particular, and museology in the Latin world. And so, but you know, as ever, we don't want to be too polar opposite about these things. So, to define museology, just to give a little bit of background, I had a look at François' Dictionnaire de Muséologie, which you should all be familiar with, because he does this at length and involves several people, including Bruno here present, to define museology. He points out that in 1958, Georges-Henri Rivière defined it as the science aimed at studying the mission and organization of the museum, but that definition has, of course, been updated several times since ICOFOM was created, also in 1977. François begins his entry on museology by pointing to three main aspects. So, while acknowledging that the etymology of museology would simply mean the study of museums, we could break it down to anything related in the museum field. For example, A, a field of research, B, an academic discipline, and C, an area of professional training. So this is a bit more all-encompassing. So from my perspective, as a field of research, I mentioned that I'm running a large project at the moment called Shared Island Stories. It may seem a little bit out of the box to focus on islands as a museologist, but not to worry. To just contextualize that, I am researching the cultural, political, social roles of island museums, community museums in society, as well as their functions and their governance. And there's a very strong focus on their role in sustainable development. For the part of ICOFOM then, just we might as well say over the last 3 years, there has been a focus on islands. We've run conferences in New Caledonia, thanks to Marion, and in St Andrews, thanks to Jamie, who's here, organising it beautifully. And also our ICOFOM LAC and ICOFOM ASPAC regional alliances have continued their work with their conferences as well. A couple of highlights just in the context of here and in Dubai, and I hope Jamie doesn't mind me mentioning, are that ICOFOM has put forward a resolution for everybody to vote on, which concerns young people and developing museums through the lens of young people and their concerns. So this has been an agenda led largely by Jamie through ICOFOM towards a resolution. And also the Sustainability Award that was mentioned earlier for ICOM has also made it as a finalist to that competition for the Youth Exchange in collaboration with Barbados Museum and Historical Society. So as an academic discipline, I think what I've learned from all of these things is simply that it can't stand on its own 2 feet. If you're going to address societal challenges, as we all seem to want to do, disciplines need to work together. And so for me, museology needs to be transdisciplinary and working alongside and with other disciplines, including science. As an area of and thirdly then, as an area of professional training, we've mentioned this already, but there is a need to broaden the offering beyond what we often see as something that's quite focused on the English-speaking world or the Latin world, to the developing, the regions that are fast developing museums, including here, Oceania, Africa, Asia, and this is a big question, I think, for museology in 2025. The truth is that the real zeitgeist of 2025 is the social role of museums. We have a new museum definition, we have an updated code of ethics, and we have the creation of SOMAS. But I'm not the best person placed here to speak about those things, and so I will leave it to my colleagues.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you especially for the very clear definitions you just gave. Maybe just to jump on what you just mentioned, is that for me, you know, a museum is basically, and go back very to basics, a place where a visitor meets an artifact, artwork. You have a visitor, you have an artifact, and the museum is a place where the visitors see the artifact. And museology actually is all what we can do to make this meeting, this very intimate moment, something of an experience ranging from pure pleasure or aesthetic emotion, as would have said the French philosopher, minister André Malraux, up to an object of knowledge. But there is a large range, and I think that making the experience as rich as possible is really what is the objective of museology. So basically, as I mentioned, on the one hand you have the collection, on the other hand you have the audience. And museology in 2025 is just the idea of identifying what could be the challenges we are facing. On the collection side, there are many challenges that arise now. For instance, the restitution, the question of restitution, the question of post-colonialism in the way the collections are displayed, and all these questions which are really current questions, which were not asked 20 or 30 years ago. When I entered museums, the idea of restitution was almost something like a taboo. So now it has really evolved. So there is many challenges on the collection side. I will not go too deep in that question now, but we have to keep in mind that museology in 2025 has to address these issues. On the audience side, we have also many issues to address, which are basically how to engage the public. Because of course, when we are in such a beautiful museum as the Louvre Abu Dhabi, very attractive with many visitors, we forget something which is very important. And I just take France as an example. In France, we have something like 1,100 museums. 95% of these museums do not attract more than 100 visitors a day. It means that engaging the audience engaging communities is not easy. We have to keep in mind that for most of the people, in France it's very clear, although there are many museums remain a boring experience. And actually the challenge of museology is how to make a museum not a boring institution. And of course, we can also dive deep into these questions, but definitely there are many ideas that emerge today. For instance, the hybridation of the proposal, you know, because I said that at the gist, the core, the crux, of a museum is this meeting between a visitor and an artifact, but of course you can reach out with digital tools, with you name it, but it's also performing art. It's the idea that a museum has to evolve. But why evolving? It's not evolving for evolving, not changing for changing, but it's really because as professionals of museums, we are all, and I'm deeply convinced that when someone is able, has a possibility to have this very intimate relation with an artifact, artworks, it's the possibility for him to open to the world, to the others. It's a question of universality. Maybe we can also go into that question, which is also something which has changed a lot. It has been revolutionized in the 21st century, in Louvre Abu Dhabi especially. But this is also a challenge of the museology in 2025. So just to sum up, we have really to think about collection and all the challenges that are facing this first part of what is a museum. Second, the audience, how to make a museum a really engaging, attractive experience, and that we have to do. And to be very frank, it's not something, it's not, we are not sure that to win this, facing all the competitors of what is a museum. For instance, we know that young people prefer screens many times, etc. So it's really the real challenges, and what museology in 2025 is facing is how to address with very positive ways all these challenges.
Thank you. I have to say I was provoked to think about this question from the lenses of this panel and of today's discussions, because this is a day that challenges us to think about the present and the future of museums. And from that perspective, I feel that all the different presentations from this morning were very telling, in the sense that, for instance, in every single one of them, the notion of community was mentioned, even in different ways, but it was present. Participation was present, engagement was present, and so on. So I was just thinking about that, how much this tells us of the changes that we're seeing in museology today, and in museums, obviously. I'm a firm believer that we are now facing a social museology turn in the sector. Museums are more oriented to societies and to different groups. We can call them audiences, but we can extend them to think about communities than they have ever been in the history of museums. And I'm very happy that, as someone who has edited a book in the history of museology through ICOFOM, I'm very glad that we have ICOFOM and ICTOP who have done amazing work in this area. And I'm also glad that, because we are in a committee for social museology, we can address these questions from a different perspective. So, for instance, for me, it's very important today that we ask ourselves as museologists, either working in a museum or teaching future professionals, what does museology owe to the people that museums have objectified and dispossessed throughout their histories? We have to ask, what do we owe? What can we do? And this is in the basis of what we call reparative museology, which is a museology that is somehow committed to the social changes, committed to social justice, committed to human rights. And that's all about what SOMUS and its different members are reflecting upon. So, based on that, I liked very much one of the concepts that was raised today, which is the idea of evolutionary exaptation, that thanks from our colleague, Professor Eduardo Saldanha de Mexico, this concept was raised, and I was really thinking a lot about that, and I even looked into a definition from biology that said that exaptation actually means a trait originally evolved for one purpose, is co-opted for a new and different function. we can translate that exactly in the museum definition that was adopted by ICOM in 2022, because in that definition, we see that some of the basic functions of museums, such as research, collecting, communicating, interpreting, were kept. And these are functions that have been, at least in the context of ICOM, since the 50s and 60s, but the purposes changed. We have critical new purposes that need to be brought to our attention. And some of them were reflected here during the previous sessions as well, such as sustainability, diversity, inclusivity, but most importantly, how do we accomplish this purpose? The definition also informs us by including phrases such as the participation of communities and sharing knowledge. This means that we're no longer supposed to see community museums as something that is completely detached from other museums or a different sector, because this vision for many years actually has generated further inequalities in the sector, inequalities of which our colleague Eunice called attention when she mentioned the financial difference that these museums face. So when you think about these inequalities, that's why we talk about knowledge sharing as a horizontal processes, because we are challenged by this definition, and I hope by our Committee on Social Museology, to rethink our practices, not just in a sense of how can we include more people, but how can we talk to them as equals, establishing symmetric relationships to build new museums. That's what we're thinking about in SOMS, and I hope this can contribute to responding to other questions here as well.
Well, first of all, I agree with all colleagues, and I will try not to repeat that, but maybe to offer a slightly different perspective. And answering the question, you know, museology in 2025, I will say museology is doing very good. And why I'm saying that, you know, if we go back 60, 65, no big deal, years ago, you know, at that time, we had first discussion about that museology is supposed to be introduced to university programs. With explanation, of course, without university programs, you will hardly reach position when the profession will be recognized. So if you think about 60 years or 65, it's really not a long period. And now, if we try to check number of different kind of museology, museum and something, museum heritage and something programs around the world, you know, it's countless. So indeed, we have the great progress. That means we have much more researchers than we have, you know, 25, 30, or especially 55 years ago. And one point colleagues know, we have something which is still called critical heritage studies, which partly, I would say, challenge what museology is doing, because museology was, for some people, all the time connected with a museum as an institution, as a building, so to say. And critical heritage studies try to maybe grab that part what Bruno actually just discussed now. And now, actually, those two lines, those two rivers, whatever, goes together. So critical heritage studies exist, people are doing things, doing research within the critical heritage studies, and museology still exists and people are doing research within museology. And they, I will say, cooperate much more. And of course, again, this is, I will say the result, the start of critical heritage studies is more than 75% connected with museology. Without museology, critical heritage studies probably will never start, or it will start much, much later than it happened. Just to give you another illustration of what I'm saying, in 2014, the ICTOP committee, ICOM ICTOP committee, have annual conference in Vietnam, and some people, I remember that situation because those people from Thailand were not from Bangkok, from some other city, which I really cannot remember now, approaching us and saying that they are doing museology for several years already. And it was kind of surprise to me. Not in the sense of saying, you know, okay, Thailand is far away or anything similar, but, you know, being aware that not in Bangkok, but in a smaller town, there is museology for at university level for several years. And that's indeed result of what I said at the beginning. You know, if we compare situation in the 1960s, 1970s, and if we compare situation now, or we could say in the last 20 years, we could say museology is doing very good.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, I will not say the contrary. I think also that museology is doing very well. And from my side, I will speak about the experience we have and what we do at the Louvre Abu Dhabi related with this field. And first, to say that we really start from the object itself. It's part of the mandate of the museum to bring to the Arab world those testimonies of ancient civilizations that were not accessible to them in the past. So what we do here is not only showing artworks. In fact, it's extracting from the objects themselves the deep meaning of those collections. So we are building in the galleries. I'm sure everyone understood that we are building a sort of networks of meanings, of exchanges, and of relations. So we see the artworks not only as assets, in fact, but and the museum itself is not a repository for artworks, but we see the pieces as the connective agents. And we could eventually draw a sort of cartography of encounters, because this is really what we try to focus on in our permanent galleries in particular, but also in the temporary ones, since we always keep this idea in mind. So what we do is to reinterpret the universalism. So it's not, when we call it a museum with a universal vocation, it's not that we are implement here a museum which would be similar to the encyclopedic museum of the old times. We reinterpret the universalism according to our definition nowadays, which means much more inclusivity and also dialogue. Of course, we drift away from the original idea that there would be one single Western canon, but we take into account all the different components of this narrative and all the different civilizations that are shown in our rooms. The museum being more a place of worlds. The third element that I wanted to evoke today is the question of research that a few minutes ago Bruno also talked about. This is really something that we have at heart at the Louvre Abu Dhabi, and in 2024 we've started with new programs of research. So this research is grounded on a laboratory on one hand, and on, of course, the curatorial team, which is very much part of it. We don't have a specific department dedicated to research. So our team is involved. Our laboratory, we have a fantastic tool which is there with 7 people doing some chemical analysis, physico-chemical analysis on artwork. So this is the possibility to give more depth to the collections. But on another hand, we have also research which are really museum studies. So we question, we challenge the original concept even of our museums. So this is how we do. This is just the start, and we launched the first series of grants and fellowships this year. So some of them may be in the room even, and we'll have a second series of grantees in next year. And every component actually of the museum is now working and adding to the value of our narrative. So even our exhibitions are directed towards this direction. And I'm thinking about the exhibition we had earlier this year, which is called Kings and Queens of Africa, a fantastic occasion for us to bring the first exhibition on African art to the region. It was, of course, using the collections from our partners in France, the Musée du Quai Branly, namely. But not only that, it was the occasion, and our director, Manuel, was there, instrumental in building new relationships with institutions across Africa. So it was also the possibility to have a symposium and to allow African museums to get a platform to express their own challenges and solutions to the world. So this was done in parallel to the exhibitions, which is a way also on capitalizing on the energy that is spent on exhibition to make sure that it doesn't close and then everything is away, but we continue the conversation and we feed the research with what was there in the exhibition. So it's going both ways. And of course, sustainability is a question that we are taking very seriously at the museum, changing our processes, our procedures, and trying to erase as much as possible the ecological footprint of the museum. And then, of course, the inclusion, the communities and the cultural diplomacy is at the heart of what we are doing. You saw the magnificent Olmec head this morning when you came to the museum. This is for us a way of adding to the museum, to its narrative, elements that were not, or that are sometimes very challenging for us to get into. And we make sure of having collaborations with countries worldwide. So I was speaking about collaborations with African countries that we are currently working on. And there is one which you saw with Mexico. There is a magnificent also program done with the Philippines. A fantastic job with this Una Bula Kenya that you will see in the Gallery 19. It's the masterpieces. It's a masterpiece of the National Museum of Philippines that was brought here, and that is added to other collaborations with the Ayala Museum. So many pieces from the Philippines are there and allow us to reach out to the communities that are numerous in the country.
Thank you all for your answers. I prepared a specific question regarding challenges you face today, but in some aspects, some of you already answered to that. So maybe we can go a bit deeper about this question. And what would you advise to go with these challenges? How do you, in your own work, how do you deal with those challenges? I was a bit, something that really was present in all your answers in some way was the challenge to deal between global aspects and very local contexts, and to reflect back and forth between these two scales. So maybe you can precise a bit on this question, please.
I will go little by little for translating. Thank you. Par rapport aux défis, d'abord par rapport à l'Afrique, l'Afrique est un vieux continent, mais qui est très jeune en matière de population. Donc, les défis que nous avons par rapport à la muséologie doivent refléter donc cette population très jeune.
Africa is an old continent in some aspect, but the current population is relatively young, and so all the challenges should reflect on this young generations.
Durant longtemps, donc après la période coloniale, les musées en Afrique avaient été dirigés par des professionnels qui n'étaient pas fondamentalement des muséologues. On avait des géographes, des historiens de l'art, donc des archéologues. Et c'est aujourd'hui vraiment que nous formons une jeune génération qui est vraiment muséologue depuis la base, avec une licence, un master et un doctorat. Donc ça, c'est un tout premier défi, de former réellement des jeunes muséologues à la base pour gérer les nouveaux musées en construction.
One of the challenges is to train a generation of museologists. It's something relatively new because after the independence, after the colonial period, museums were directed by people not trained in museology, but in other disciplines such as archaeology, artistry, geography, etc. Now, museology can be trained and learned from bachelor, master, and doctoral degrees.
Monsieur Jean-Paul Koudougou, qui a présenté tout à l'heure les musées en Afrique, nous a montré que le continent également se lance dans la construction des infrastructures culturelles, notamment les musées. De fait, nous avons besoin de personnel dans un musée. Et donc, le premier défi de ces écoles, comme par exemple l'école du patrimoine africain, c'est donc d'avoir des professionnels en matière de quantité, mais surtout en matière de qualité, qui connaissent non seulement le continent, mais qui connaissent également les œuvres à gérer.
As Jean-Paul Koudougou presented this morning, many African countries are now building some new infrastructures and museums. And relating to that, one of the challenge is to have a good team of different curators to work in those museums in the future. Not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of the quality of their of the trainings they got. Concerning this quality, especially that knows how to deal with a museum, but also knows pretty well the continent.
Donc, pour répondre à ce défi, d'ailleurs, il y a 2 mois environ, ICOM Africa, donc avec Jean-Paul à sa tête, a organisé au Burkina Faso une formation pour les jeunes étudiants en patrimoine culturel. Et ils ont été formés durant quelques jours à certaines réalités de la muséologie sur notre continent.
A few months ago, Jean-Paul Koudougou organized a training for young museum professionals in Burkina Faso, his own country, to train young professionals from these very local specificities.
Alors pour finir, je vais finir par ceci. L'école du patrimoine africain a 2 spécialités actuellement. Les gestionnaires de sites et monuments et les conservateurs de musées. Donc à l'avenir, nous souhaiterons donc ouvrir des masters en conservation-restauration, médiation culturelle, gestion des réserves et bien entendu sécurité et sûreté des musées.
Until now, the École du patrimoine africain has 2 main focus, which are curation of collections and monuments and sites, but there are some projects to open other master degrees in conservation restorations, mediation and addressing public audiences, management of storages, and of course security of museums. Thank you, Carly.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So just before moving on to possible ways to overcome challenges, just to mention, several people touched earlier on questions of sustainability, sustainable development, the climate emergency, and maybe not enough has been said about that. The ICOM Strategic Plan 2022 to 2028 highlights themes, as many people here know, and among them are diversity, climate change, digital futures, and decolonization. All of these are really important, and they relate to museology as well. ICOM promotes working with the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. And I think from the perspective of museology, we need to run with that, but also maybe question it a little bit as well, in the sense that development itself is such a contested term in the context of historic and systemic global inequalities. And also to acknowledge that the SDGs are failing. So I had a look at a couple of reports, recent reports from the UN on the SDGs on food and agriculture. So by 2030, the prediction is that over half of the targets will not be met. And in fact, 30 of them will be stalled or getting worse by, according to the 2015 baseline. Current national commitments to climate would lead to average global temperature increase of an increase of 3 degrees by the end of this century, which inevitably leads to irreversible tipping points. National biodiversity strategies and action plans are also inadequate. They lack financial and institutional support. And then, despite record production, some 735 million people go to bed hungry every night. So what can museums do about that? So one thing that Marion has touched on is this idea of thinking global and acting local, which is a Scottish phrase from a Scottish thinker, but it's true when you reflect upon it that that's, I think, what most people here do. They think globally because you're a member of ICOM and you value partnership working and networking, but you act local in where you're from and where you care about. And I think that that's just something very important to keep us rooted. It's important, I think, within a framework of something like ICOM to really make the most of our partnership working and our networking. But we're also going to, as you all know, be careful to do this within ecological limits going forwards. So we can treasure moments like this when we can meet in person and get to know each other properly, but we're also going to have to think about those ecological boundaries as well, thinking of future generations. I want to agree with my colleague Carly that for us also in our research, the next generation are the priority, and in much of the research that we've been doing, the focus has been on intergenerational transmission of knowledge and increasingly intergenerational transmission of traditional ecological knowledge is becoming, I would say, an increasingly important solution, if you wish, or a pathway forwards to do something positive in the face of the news that I read out, which is really, it could get one really quite anxious and upset. So for me, I think it's time to really find ways to step forwards carefully towards just making a better future. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to insist again on the fact that, according to me, there are two main families of challenges, one concerning collections and the second concerning audience. Maybe just to take one or two examples on both families of challenges. Concerning the collection, I think maybe we can take advantage of being in the Louvre Abu Dhabi, where, as I said this morning, we have a museum which, in many ways, is some kind of the idea or the archetype or the essence of a museum, because it has faced so many challenges with many means and such an ambition that I think we can really have takeaways from this museum. Concerning the collection, for instance, and of course it's just one point, but there are many others, it's the idea of universality in the collections of a museum. And what is very interesting in the Louvre Abu Dhabi, that although it has the name of the Louvre Paris, which is also considered rather than an encyclopedia museum than a universal museum, but actually, you know, to transform the idea of universality deriving in the Louvre Paris from the 18th century Western philosophy to something which is much closer to the contemporary post-colonial philosophy of someone like Edouard Glissant, who was mentioned this morning, which makes, you know, the collection, universal collection, not as something which is a totalization of art through one lenses, but a universality based on relations. And that's really what Edouard Glissant says. And I think really, consciously or not consciously, here in Abu Dhabi, all the teams involved in this project managed. And it's really some kind of a revolution in the way that collections are considered. And I think this challenge of, you know, creating something new in the way that in art there is no hierarchy, there is no progress, but really a dialogue of artifacts and artworks coming from all over the world is something very peculiar in this museum, and it makes it very important to have this in mind, because I think that this, let's say, equality between artworks is something which is a real challenge for museology in 2025, and the solution implemented in Abu Dhabi is really something very interesting. On the other family of challenge, audience, we mentioned that, and I really insist that engaging the audience, engaging communities, engaging all visitors is really the challenge of tomorrow, because really, as I said, competition is harsh, you know, for everybody, but especially the youth. There are so many ways to spend time rather than going into a museum that we really need to find solutions. And to take the example of Louvre Abu Dhabi, for instance, of course, the gist of it is the quality of the display of the collection as beautifully designed, but it's also all what can make the museum attractive by other means. And for instance, I'll just take some example, and of course Guilhem knows better than me, but you know, for instance, you have some kind of things that could be considered as, you know, an accessory, for instance, kayaking, making yoga in the around the Louvre, in the Louvre, but also, you know, having invitations for the taxi drivers. Taxi drivers may come for free in the Louvre Abu Dhabi, you know, because taxi drivers most of the time are migrant people coming especially from India, etc., and making the museum where they go almost once or twice a day for their clients. You know, it's also something that may engage the community, which is very concrete. It's not theoretical, because theory is good, but concrete acts are better in my mind. And that's very important. But also, you know, in a museum like Louvre Abu Dhabi, how to have a dialogue with contemporary art. And for instance, now there is an exhibition called Art Here with contemporary artists whose artworks are displayed in the museum. So it's not one solution or two solutions. Many different actions, but all those actions have one objective. It's really to attract the visitor to be able to meet and take advantage of, you know, looking at, contemplating the artwork. And I really also insist on this mission of the museum. But of course, there are so many challenges, but these two, concerning collection and universality, concerning how to engage the public to make the museum attractive, I think the real and very important ones. And the example of Louvre Abu Dhabi is really an interesting one, because we are in Louvre Abu Dhabi, so you may, of course, challenge what I'm saying, but you just have to go and see around, and I hope we'll be convinced.
Thank you. Yeah, agreeing with my colleagues in this panel, and obviously there are many challenges we could refer to, but I wanted to focus on three groups. which are clearly interconnected. The first one are the material challenges. And when I refer to material challenges, I refer to the financial situation of museums and the financial crisis, but also the inequality in the sector. We have some museums with a lot of money and some museums with no money at all. But also the material conditions in which collections are preserved. Whose collections are we preserving? Whose collections are being prioritized? There are also inequalities in that area as well. So I refer to that as material collections, which in this sense, I think the only solution would be to focus on reparative practices and how can we make the sector more equal and accessible to more people. The other group of challenges, I would say, are those related to capacity building, and I think we have, especially because we have many teachers in this panel, we have to address that. We talk a lot about participation and engagement, but are we training professionals to work with museums with those tools in order to involve people, or are we just training them to work with collections, or are we training them to think about how to relate the two, because collections are not separated from people, and collections are only have meaning and can only be interpreted through different perspectives provided by people. So this has led me to, as a lecturer at the University of St. Andrews, to work in the, we have done a curriculum reformulation into 2022, and since then we have included several courses that are much more connected to this kind of skills that are now needed in the sector. Because if we go to the most traditional, the biggest or the smallest museums, even in Europe, you will hear professionals complaining that they don't really know how to bring people in, how to involve communities, how to do all those things that we put in beautiful words in definitions and resolutions. So we need professionals who can know how to do that. The third challenge, and maybe this is the trickiest one, are the ethical challenges. Because we do have a lot of guidelines and normative documents that orient our work, nonetheless, they are still attached to a different profile of museum and a different understanding of the sector. So ICOM, for instance, has changed its museum definition 3 years ago, and now we're going through a revision of the Code of Ethics. What does it mean to be doing that right now? It doesn't mean that we're not going to be looking into collections and how collections must be managed, but we already have a lot of tools for that, and the current Code of Ethics of ICOM is still very much focused on collections. So how can we think about a more relational ethics for museum professions? How can we think about ethics that allow us to relate and to make connections between heritage and people in better ways and in ethical ways? So I would emphasize these three areas of challenges.
Yeah. From my point of view, I think that the main challenge is always the same, and that's the relevance of museums in society. And I think at the beginning, and especially if you're speaking about the new museology, when it started in the 1970s, it was all the time about the relevance of museums in society. And the only thing which could kill museology is if museums lost that. If they lose that, you know, museology does not have reason to exist anymore. And as colleagues, some of colleagues mentioned, of course, it will not happen, at least not, it will not happen soon. I don't have the crystal ball, so cannot predict the future. But, you know, if museum will be less and less relevance, without now going into discussion why that happened, and this is relevant for Louvre Abu Dhabi at one side and small museum in a village on any parts of the world, so any scale of museum. So if they lose that connection, if they lose that relevance, then of course, you know, new students will not have interest, or people will not have interest to work in museums. New students will not have interest to study museology. We will have less and less researchers. We will have less and less people who do have interest working and in museums. And when I'm speaking about museums, I'm speaking about museums as guardians of the heritage. So including the, of course, different action and scales which are not necessarily official museum, but quite very strong have very strong connection with heritage and some form of museum institution. So I think that challenge is existing all the time, and I don't think that today or in 2025 the challenge is higher than 10 years before, or it will be different in 10 years from now, but it's always there, and we're supposed to always to care about that. And what we do actually, we do care about that. Of course, we are sometimes frustrated, all of us, not only those of us who are working at universities, that things are not, we don't see that in museums, or we are not seeing that enough in museums. But the only thing which could really destroy it, if we say, okay, we tried to do it, it didn't work, so let's switch to something else. And I'm sure nobody of us will do that, but that's really something which will be decided by the people, by community. Again, whatever its community, it could be 55 people in a village, could be 8 billion of humans on this planet, so everything in between.
Thank you. Yeah. From my side, I group the challenges under 3-4 different families, and I completely agree with you on the fact that one of our key challenges is the question of relevance, and that's what we are also seeing through the cultural program that we are unfolding in our galleries, is that we always have to remain meaningful for our visitors, for our audience. And we have here at Louvre Abu Dhabi an increasingly global visitorship, so we have always to keep track of that and to make sure that we respond to the needs of our visitors. We need to make sure that they are still participating, that they are involved into what we are proposing them, and the counterpart in a way of the relevance is the question of balance, because each time we grow the collection, each time we change an artwork in our galleries, this is the very delicate balance that we are touching there, and we have to make sure that we keep the balance. If we bring a magnificent artwork from the West, then we have to make sure that we keep the balance also for the other cultures that are represented and that still need to be represented at the same high level of quality and of interest for our visitors. Then the second group of challenges that I see is probably the question of building the capacity in an environment where we have so many institutions that are coming. We need, of course, many museum professionals from the UAE, because the idea is that we are here training and we are building the capacity of the UAE. And for that, I'm lucky enough to say that we have a very interesting, great program that is built by France Museum and Hervé and your team. I see Etienne there. That is bringing the best specialists to the UAE in order to train the local young generation to the museum work. Also, of course, the question of sustainability, and I mentioned that before, but we have to adapt and to make the best possible efforts to adapt to the new situation. Probably, ultimately, this is a question of the imagination. I mean, the challenge is that we need to get enough imagination to solve all these challenges and these issues that we are facing.
Last but not least, I have a very last question before I open to the floor. If there are some questions, then that we do not miss the sunset on the terrace. For those who don't know, maybe for some of you it will ring a bell. In ICOFOM we have a very strong tradition of working between practices and theories. So my last question is relates to that. How do you work between theories and practices? And what are the theories that you use for in your work? If you can just pick up one or two, that I know it is another challenge to select. What would be?
Merci beaucoup. Donc, comment s'articule la théorie et la pratique en muséologie et de façon personnelle et en ce qui concerne également l'institution où j'enseigne? Alors, la pratique et la théorie vont de pair. Et je dirais même que la pratique, c'est 70% de ce que nous faisons à l'école du patrimoine africain.
In the École du patrimoine africain, practices represent 70% of what you do, and it is completely intertwined with theories.
Au départ, d'ailleurs, l'école du patrimoine africain formait déjà les professionnels qui étaient sur le terrain avant qu'ils ne reçoivent des cours théoriques.
In the beginning, the school trained professionals that went on field works who were already working before they received theoretical backgrounds.
Alors, l'école du patrimoine africain possède en son sein un musée qui est en même temps un cadre pratique pour le travail des étudiants.
There is a museum within the school which can be also used for trainings for the students.
Et pour la petite histoire, le musée a commencé à constituer sa collection depuis 1996. Et comment? Chaque étudiant, en venant donc à l'école du patrimoine africain, devait arriver avec un objet qui est déposé comme patrimoine de l'école dans ce musée-là.
The collection of the museum started with a focus on students who should bring one object when they arrived in the museum that entered into the collection to represent the heritage of the school itself.
Donc ce principe faisait que les étudiants avaient un sentiment d'appartenance et ils prenaient mieux soin des objets qui se trouvent dans ce musée parce que chacun a un objet dans ce musée.
Thanks to this principle, students really feel, all the students really feel an attachment to the museum, and they really take care of these collections.
Dans un second volet, je puis dire que l'école entretient une très bonne relation avec le gouvernement, qui actuellement est en train de mettre sur pied 4 grands nouveaux musées.
The school has strong relationships with the government of the Republic of Benin. As Jean-Paul told a bit this morning, there are 4 new museums that are under construction now in the country.
Donc, grâce à l'expertise du directeur, nous envoyons déjà les étudiants en formation sur le terrain, donc au niveau des chantiers de collection, et ils travaillent en étant étudiants avec des professionnels qui sont sur le terrain en train de préparer ces musées en construction.
Some students are already go to the construction to work on those museums that will open soon.
Et nous organisons également des masterclass pratiques où nous invitons par exemple des sapeurs-pompiers pour nous parler de la sécurité-sûreté, des policiers pour nous parler donc de comment réagir en cas de vol, ou bien des sachants, donc des connaisseurs des pratiques traditionnelles de nos collections africaines.
Some professional master classes are also organized within the school with fire workers or policemen or traditional elders of heritage who can share and train differently to the students.
Je vais finir par ceci que je vais dire en anglais, tu permets. C'est une citation d'un professeur qui a enseigné chez nous, il s'appelle professeur André. Il dit ceci qui résume un peu la question, à mon sens. Our ancestors may not have created museums, but they certainly have institutions to preserve and promote their creations. We should learn about them and try to make a better use of them. J'espère que je me suis fait comprendre. It's good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. For my part, I would frame this probably going back to the three key areas of museology, of research, academic discipline and training. So from the point of view of research, there's always been this tension that I mentioned earlier between, if we say museology and museum studies, there's a tension between theory and practice. And as an academic, we have tensions between perceptions of us sitting in ivory towers and the real world. So obviously none of these are completely true because at the end of the day we're all human, but they exist and we can hold them in creative tension if we try hard enough. My own background was in art history, French and English literature. Most of my PhD was about poetry, but if I learned anything about that from that, thinking about relationships between word and image, it was that disciplines shouldn't be rivals, they should be friendly neighbours, as a theorist once put it. And this is being carried through to museology, working, as I've mentioned earlier, with cognate disciplines and very different disciplines as well. Regards training then, I think we have tensions there as well between, we get criticised for training museum studies students sometimes. If you have a master's in museum studies, what was the point of that? You'd be better spending that year or two actually working in the workplace and getting some practical experience so you'll be useful when you hit the ground. So that's something that can be said there between theory and practice. But also, we have a challenge to humanities at the moment, certainly in the UK, it's under threat. And there's a big push towards STEM subjects, and modern languages in particular are at danger. In the context of museum studies, we produce a lot of graduates around the world, and there could also be an ethical question there about flooding the market and not having enough jobs for these really excited and well-trained graduates to be obtaining. So I don't have any easy answers to overcoming theory and practice, but I've just raised more questions probably than given more answers, but thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, of course, the question of the relation between theory and practice is very important. I just would like to mention that maybe some years ago, let's say 20 years ago, even today maybe, museums sometimes, museum professionals were a bit empirical. They tried some solutions, and trial and error method was really implemented rather largely. So my point is just never do that. Trial and error maybe could be efficient at the end of the day, but it's costly, it's not very effective. Better to ask to ask some advice, for instance, from France Museum, of course, but from other. No, my point is really to say that this empirical way of organizing museums, organizing the activities of museums, it's a bit obsolete. And today, of course, theory are feeding the way we can imagine how museum can do in practice. And this theory can be, let's say, a bit top-down. For instance, I mentioned the universal revolution of the concept here in Abu Dhabi, and it comes from anthropology, philosophy, history as well, and of course museum studies, but definitely it is a theoretical point of view that led to what Abu Dhabi display of collection is today. But it could be also a bottom-up way of proceeding, and for instance in France Museum what we try is to get all the best practices in order to create a kind of corpus, a way of proceedings that could be derived or also implemented in other museums. So basically, my answer is really today theory is feeding practices. The empirical way of doing things is sometimes it's what is happening, but definitely it's not the good solution. And having a bit of methodology in that way is something which is really a condition of success.
Yeah, going in similar directions. Since I started working as an academic, for me, the separation between theory and practice never made sense, especially in museology. And I also have a background in anthropology. And I remember reading the French sociologist Pierre Bourdieu when he says that theory doesn't make sense unless it is invested in empirical work, which is a very basic principle for social scientists, and that's something that I applied into museology in a sense. So just to give an example of how this was tested, I'm not going to say successfully or not, because it's difficult to measure the effects, but when I worked in Brazil, for instance, I established a research lab on experimental museology, which technically meant that we took students to work with community-based museums and to work with community members developing the museum. So this meant in different moments, for instance, creating a museum from scratch, or establishing a documentation system where the collections were absolutely not documented, or working with collections with very poor state of conservation and having to find ways to improve conservation conditions in difficult situations. Obviously, this was only possible because we were working with community museums. If I took my students to larger, more established and resourced museums, they wouldn't face such challenging situations. So from the point of view of teaching, this was very, very interesting to do, and this is still a very active research lab in Rio. The other thing that we do in our AMLET program in St. Andrews is our students have, because we have a one-year master's, half of this time students are in museums working with over 40 partners that we have, where they do work-based placements and spend a number of hours working in museums and trying to apply what we have discussed in the classroom in these institutions all over Scotland. The other thing as well, when you think about practices, I think we have to constantly be challenging our theory. So one of the things that we've done as well by creating new courses in this program was to introduce different forms of theory looking into other epistemology. So for instance, we have a module on community heritage and sustainability, which was created by Karen, by the way. And I started working on this module, and what we did in 2022 was to introduce indigenous knowledge, especially indigenous knowledge from groups in South America with which I used to work, in this course to think sustainability not from the perspective of the SDGs, because they are universal standards, but we wanted something more concrete, but to think from the perspective of indigenous epistemologies and practices, how can we think of sustainability in the different way. This was very successful, at least from the point of view of the university. We received an award for sustainability, and this is also a very popular module among our students. So.
Yeah, very similar, I would say, in my case, maybe just things are a little bit different. So I will share my personal story. So after some 10 plus or almost 15 years working at university and building my academic career, some requests for doing some consultancy work came from some institution, not necessarily museum, could be interpretation center or somebody who wants to do interpretation center or something similar. And then actually why I decided to go into that and establish my company, which I mentioned before, was I started to feel that I'm really far away from the practice. And yeah, I'm delivering to students my knowledge and so on, but actually, I don't know what is going on, in the field. So I decided to do that, and of course, it destroyed my time and it slowed down my academic career, but I'm still happy because, I'm still having for example, at the end of the semester when students are doing evaluation, when I see the comment, beside other questions, when I see the comment, professor speaks a lot about the practical examples, then I feel good. That I really feel that I deliver to them. Of course, I'm delivering theory. They will understand or be good or not so good in theories, but I'm happy that they have that kind of the comment. And beside that, we are doing similar like colleagues. We, for example, have the museum exhibition, the course museum exhibition, where more or less students every year will build one exhibition. It's sometimes very small scale, sometimes with cooperation with the local museum in Zagreb. They could build something, bigger. It will not happen every year, but they are doing some scale, some exhibition every year. Or, for example, on another course, they are simulating, the project work. So, they will propose something, and then we will do through that semester, which is not a long time. We will simulate practical work. And of course, the internship is something which, as Bruno mentioned, I think we are all frustrated because students, when, academic system is rigid quite often. So when you plan your master, then at the end, you never have enough time for internship. And we are frustrated, students are frustrated, but we cannot beat the master. The university is still the bigger than us.
From our point of view, I think we have to draw two different periods within the history of the museum. The first one being since the inception of the project until the opening, and then after the opening. This is a completely different story. And the first period is really the time where the team that was in place had many possibilities and a lot of time to explore the overarching theories of museology, from André Malraux to Edouard Glissant. And it was a very long time also due to sometimes delays in the project itself. And then the second period started after the opening of the museum. And then we used another type of theory, but much more practical. And we had to, very interestingly, build our own policies and procedures while at the same time doing the work at the museum. So this is very interesting, but very challenging as well, because the time frame was very much with constraints. So, and then we were, of course, supported by all the corpus of documents that has been produced throughout time by the ICOM, as well as, for example, the Spectrum documents that from UK that supported a lot what we've been doing. And then after several years, and now we have almost completed everything, all of our policies and procedures. I think this work, which is quite unique, even if a bit dry sometimes, this corpus of documents is very much supporting all our brother museums around that are now coming to birth, and this is where we see the value of this heavy load that we had earlier after the opening of the museum.
Thank you all. Juliette. Dis-moi.
We have to stop now because it's time to have a nice drink offered by ICOM France. If you want to benefit from the sunset, it's time to leave the room. I want to thank everybody, all speakers.
Thank you all for I'm so happy to mix the six of you to talk about the different challenges of museology in 2025. Thank you all for being still there in the auditorium with some shawls and things on their shoulders to survive to freezing. We'll go now to the terrace for the sunset and to continue also the discussions, to have a drink offered by ICOM France. And I hope that we can go deeper with those the different discussions we opened today during the whole week in Dubai. Thank you all.